So let's make a start. It's 7 o'clock on the dot, and really warm welcome this evening to the Agri Leader event. Tonight we're focusing on staying ahead of the curve with a fantastic global insight with three phenomenal speakers. I'm Laura Ryan and I'm co-chairing tonight's session with Izak, Knowledge Exchange Senior Manager at AHDB. Hi Izak, really looking forward to tonight's session. Looking down the attendee list, there's a few folks that are new to Agri Leader. Just give us a bit of a reminder about what Agri Leader is about and why it's such a great initiative to be involved in.
Hi Laura, and thanks to everyone who tuned in this evening for what I'm sure will be a great evening. Well, if this is your first foray into Agri Leader, basically the program is led by myself and Mark Campbell, in which we aim to provide a platform where like-minded farmers and growers can meet, exchange ideas, learn from each other, but also from specialists, both from within and outside of the industry, through events like tonight. But I'm also very excited to share that we'll be launching our live TED-type talks with a mix of inspirational speakers, but also some everyday leaders really excelling and running their businesses. These TED-type talks will be on the third Thursday of every other month at 11 o'clock in the morning. Plus, we're launching our Agri Leader news bundle on the alternating months at the same time. And of course, we've got our flagship event, the Agri Leader Forum, the next one being in February 2022. So keep an eye out for the exact dates of that, and make sure you join that. A really good event. Well, the Agri Leader program is basically based on three key themes: leadership, growth, and resilience. Leadership, leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your business. Growth, creating opportunities, building and extending networks. Resilience, that work-life balance, strategic planning and business resilience, and mental toughness. Tonight's session will focus on growth and business resilience, and we've brought you an amazing lineup of global experts to help your decision-making as the key people from our leading farming and growing businesses. So I'm really looking forward to tonight. Just a few bits to remind people of, Laura.
Yeah, so we're recording tonight's session. So if you want to come back to it at any point, you can do that by an email link that you'll receive after tonight's event, or you can head over to the Agri Leader page on the AHDB website and watch back tonight's session. We're using the Hop-In platform tonight, which you may well have used before. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box on the right-hand side. And the great thing about Hop-In, it allows us to bring folks onto the main stage. So we would love to make it as interactive as possible. So if you'd like to come onto the main stage and ask your question, you just need to press the blue button in the top right hand corner saying share your video and audio, and we'll bring you to the stage to ask your question directly to our panel. If you prefer not to be on screen, that's totally fine. We'll read out the question for you. And if we get too many questions, we'll make sure some of them, or all of them, get answered at the end of tonight by some of our experts and come back to you afterwards on email. So tonight's session, rather than death by PowerPoint, we've challenged our amazing three speakers to record a bit of a video really on what they think staying ahead of the curve means to them. So we're going to play you that video. It's around about 20 minutes and that includes the three speakers, and then we'll bring the three speakers on live. So please do get your questions ready to chat to them. Let's play the video.
Welcome to the AHDB Agri Leader International Panel Debate, how UK farmers and growers can stay ahead of the curve. I'm Christine Taken. I've worked in farming, I have worked in retail, and I have worked as an engineer. So hopefully I'll be able to add some interesting perspectives. And I wanted to start with the fact that I went to business school and got an MBA at Cranfield, and there we were being taught about Michael Porter's way of evaluating where a business sits. And I found this useful throughout my career. And it was probably old-fashioned now, but it's worked for me. And it tells you to think about the 5 different forces that affect the competitiveness of a sector. There's the supplier power, the buyer power, the barriers to entry, the threat of substitutes, and the competitive rivalry within the industry. And I think when we're looking at farming on the whole, that the supplier power is very strong. The buyer power is also very strong. The threat of substitutes is actually quite weak. It's very difficult for people to find another way of another fresh produce or a substitute for milk or a substitute for meat. There are some, but it's I think on the whole it's quite weak. And I think barriers to entry is weak as a threat, because it is very difficult for other people to come in, whether you're owning land or the infrastructure. And I think the thing that varies depending on what sector you're in is the competitive rivalry. So in some areas, the rivalry is immense if you look at something like sheep farming or beef farming, because there's just so many people. And in other areas, the rivalry is not such an issue. You know, if you're a very big strawberry producer, you're probably in one of 3 or 4 big producer organisations. So you don't have that sort of constantly being undercut by other people. But this is a way of actually looking at your industry and looking at each one of those areas and what can you control and what can't you control and what you can influence. And certainly in every job I've ever done, I've started doing a map like that to understand where I can get involved. So in terms of what you can do to stay ahead of the curve, certainly I would say as a starter is understand your consumer and your customer. So even if you are selling to a retailer, the retailer is going to be focused on the consumer. So understanding both of those is important. And that's about looking at the trends, listening to what they're saying to you, listening to what the retailers are asking for. I think it's very, very important nowadays to collaborate with your customer, to look at ways that you can mutually drive things forward, mutually improve, and have a relationship where you can challenge back when they're asking you to do things, because that's going to end up with a much more efficient way of working. And I think that in everything you do, focus on efficiency. You're always going to be driven to provide a better deal for them. And I think the next area, after focusing on your consumer and your customer, is to focus on technology. There is so much to be gained by actually using all of the data that you collect, whether it's to use it for benchmarking, whether it's for carbon auditing. I think we have barely scratched the surface of what we can do with technology. And particularly one of the startups I work with has software that just will hoover up the data from everything that you already have on in your business and be able to enable you to benchmark a glass house against another one, a field against another one, type groups of animals against other ones, but just teaching you not only from your own area of work, but also benchmarking against other people. So I think staying ahead of the curve and focusing on technology and what we can really do with that data is very, very important. And I think another area, which I think I've touched on when I talked about focusing on efficiency, is about focusing on continuous improvement. And in my role as Red Tractor, which I've only just started and very much still in listening mode, it's slightly frightening to me, I think, we seem in some areas of the farming and growing sector to be focusing on trying not to keep improving. And I think in any other area of industry, you're always trying to focus on improvement, whether it be efficiency, whether it be training of staff, whether it be your worker welfare, whether it be your carbon footprint. And with many of these things, unless you're focusing on them and measuring them, you're probably not pushing things forward. But I don't think we're an industry that has grown up with continual professional development. And any management, in any profession, I myself am a chartered engineer, that whilst I want to keep up my chartership, if you want to call it that, I have got to demonstrate continuous improvement, and I'm always trying to find new ways, particularly in the agricultural industry, where I don't have any innate understanding of it. It's not my background. It's always about learning new things, watching new things, even if it's just You get webinars and things nowadays. So continuous improvement is interesting. And also, I have always treated, in all the businesses I've been in, internal audit. You can imagine being in a business like the Co-op, or when I chaired the Met Office and things like that. Internal audit I have always seen as something that is immensely useful, having somebody independent looking at what I'm doing. And certainly when I was in the Co-op, I used to ask internal audit to go and look at the areas where I felt vulnerable, where I wanted to understand more. So to me, an audit is another way of driving continuous improvement. And I do sort of hear sort of whispers in the farming community when they're concerned about red tractor, that they don't like people coming to audit, and they're worried that they'll pull them up. But actually, it should be welcomed. And the final area I wanted to talk about was recruiting for the future. And in my role as chair of MDS, I am immensely proud of the fact that we are recruiting and training graduates of all sorts of disciplines, whether it might be bioarchaeology, it might be music production, it might be chemistry, it might be languages, it might be geography. But we are recruiting people with leadership potential. At the moment, we've got 66 trainees, we've got 55 member businesses, and those trainees are spending 4 6-month placements in those businesses whilst we also train them. And at the end of those 2 years, they are highly employable, and the members will be fighting over who's going to recruit them. So I think staying ahead of the curve, the points I've made, is firstly to evaluate and know where you stand. Secondly, to be focusing on your consumer and your customer, what you can do to make that relationship better. Thirdly, focusing on technology. Fourthly, focusing on continuous improvement in the business. And finally, thinking about recruiting for the future. I hope you found that interesting, and I very much look forward to discussing some of these points. Thank you.
Welcome to the AHDB Agri-Leader International Panel Discussion. Well, how can UK farmers stay ahead of the curve? Let me look at it from my side and perspective. I'm looking at global markets, and global markets have been extremely volatile, related to mainly supply and demand drivers, but also politically motivated interrupters in those markets. Let's start off with the international flows. First of all, the trend is ongoing that population around the world is growing. We see the demand for food grains and also feed increasing significantly over time. That's good news for everybody producing crops around the world, because we have demand for those crops. However, that's not always the case. We also see that farmers in certain regions can and have reacted tremendously to those price signals by expanding land and farmed acreage quite a bit over time. If we're looking at the price moves we've seen here in 2021, especially the protein feed, so soybean meal have increased a lot. Not much UK farmers might be able to do on that. However, clearly a massive impact for those livestock farmers in the UK. But if we're looking just one tier down, we actually see also that prices of food and feed grains have risen substantially in the last 12 months. Let me tell you a little bit about the motivating factors for those price volatilities and swings. Well, we all know about COVID, so don't let me talk too much about the whole impact there. But actually, the fears of demand reductions were much, much bigger than the real impact. What do I mean? Well, prices in 2020 in April declined substantially when the news hit, when the stock market crashed. Oil prices collapsed and actually went negative. We've also seen that prices of our agri-commodities were impacted somewhat to the downside. But if we're looking from here on forward, actually the demand was tremendous around the world, motivated from countries importing more to refill some of their necessary inventories to maybe overcome some supply shortages and interruptions in the supply chain. Luckily, we have not seen any severe disruptions in the supply chain. The chains actually worked extremely well in those never before seen times of uncertainty of COVID. So the big drivers on the demand side are actually for food grains, the continued demand increase in regions like Africa as well as in Southeast Asia. On the feed grain side, however, the big driving force is what's happening in China. China was for quite a while in trade wars with the United States, partly not importing anything from the US. Afterwards, in January of 2020, actually signing the Phase 1 trade deal, acknowledging that it would import substantial amounts of agri-commodities from the United States. Well, many people doubted that the country China will be able to meet those numbers, but the imported in volumes from the US have been very, very big. However, let's be also clear, China needed those volumes. The African swine fever disease in 2018 in China reduced the inventories of hogs by 50%. Let me tell you about the size of this. About half of the world's hog population is located in China. If you're wiping out the half of that, it's basically the amount of hogs we have in North America or over here in Europe. So sizable amount of hogs fell victim to this disease. However, the recovery from African swine fever has been fairly quick. We're not through it yet. We're not over the hump yet. However, the increase for demand for feeding in China is real, it's substantial, and it's not only coming from hogs. But in those times of reduced availability of pork, also chicken and aquaculture has shown tremendous growth. So right now, the country is actually developing for the first time ever into what might become the biggest importing country in the world for corn. Usually the country never imports any corn. Now it's importing massive amounts. The other side is we need to look at the supply. And here we all know about the dryness that we faced in 2020 all across Europe. Climate change has clearly played a tremendous impact on our production volumes in the last few years here in the European Union, but also in the UK, which has left the EU, and with that we also have to talk Brexit in a minute. So supply in Europe was constrained, but not only in Europe. We've also seen the supply over in the North America being constrained. Expectations early in the season were for massive amounts of production of grains. However, with weather problems and other uncertainties, actually those big volumes have not materialized. We have weather problems in South America. So all of that is actually good news for the UK, for the growers in the UK, because the grower can participate in the international driven price increase in those commodities. And well, I don't need to tell you what good and high grain prices also for your farm mean. But what is important here, this is only possible as long as the UK is able to export and to serve some of those markets, because in normal years, the UK has a surplus of grains. Clearly, in years like the last season where we had dryness, that's a different game park. But on average, there needs to be a large amount of wheat and barley exported to other countries. And those other countries are traditionally the European Union. So in my mind, the Brexit deal, at least for those exports of grains and oilseeds, is actually something positive, because the UK farmers otherwise would face a situation where the country UK could not absorb all the produced volumes of barley and wheat and could have not exported to the European Union, because the European Union for many years has very clear rules. Everybody who wants to import to us in the EU needs to pay €100 roughly per ton duty, a price that kills every trade. So with that said, if you can't export from the UK over here, you have to ship to other outlets in the world, and that's pretty much the traditional North African markets, the Middle Eastern markets like Saudi Arabia for barley, and there you're in fierce competition from EU exports, from Ukraine exports, from Russia exports, Australia, everybody wants to go there. And with that, I think the deal for Brexit would have probably or has probably avoided quite a bit of more negative price impact for farmers. How else can the UK grower benefit from those international markets? Well, I think the goal for many farmers is to maximize your returns on farms. So cost in many regions and also the UK on farm has always been a key factor. But also being able to manage some of the risk for the future is something important. If we look at those high prices that we have right now, they might not stay with us for long. Right now, our projection is that prices will remain elevated above the levels we have seen in the past 2 or 3 years. However, the price levels that we're seeing right now are at already pretty good levels, and we doubt that they can hold up throughout the year just because we will probably have a decent Northern Hemisphere crop. We can't say much about it because, as you know, the yield determining period will only start in May, but for now it looks like farmers in several regions of the world have expanded the wheat area, the barley area, and with that we might face some price pressure if the overall kind of weather stays pleasant and is helping the crops. Clearly, the big differentiating factor for this upcoming season is we do not have in Europe, but also in many other regions of the world, a lot of buffer stock. So whatever negative crop impact we have will immediately and quicker than in past years support prices. Let me end it here, and looking forward to our panel discussion.
Hi, and welcome to the AHDB Agri-Leader International Panel Debate. How can UK farmers stay ahead of the curve? Well, from my perspective, there are 5 big trends that are affecting our sector that I think that you in the UK need to be keeping a big eye on. So the first of these is called disintermediation. And I know it seems like a really big word. It's happening in every single industry, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about insurance or finance, or we're talking about agricultural equipment, or we're talking about ghost kitchens, or we're talking about the way that people buy their food. What we see is that this disintermediation is the idea that the number of steps between the producer and the consumer has been dropping rapidly since the digital era. And it really started probably in the late 1990s, but it's accelerating at the moment. And so what this means is that you've probably seen a real growth in direct-to-consumer offerings from farms. So I lived in the UK for quite some time. I bought things like meat from Farmerson, for example. So what we see is we see online farms and farming consortia getting together and doing a direct-to-consumer offer. And if you look at the UK at the moment, there are a lot of these offers. I wanted to send my family a beef Wellington at Christmas, and I got that online. I wanted to send them a goose, and I managed to find a goose direct from the farm. And we bought Welsh lamb last year when I was there in the spring, and we ordered it directly from the farmer. So this direct to consumer is something that's a major trend that isn't going away and will be continuing for quite some time. What the other side of disintermediation is that the supply chain is becoming simpler. So it also is much easier than ever before for us to organise our transport, say from farm to consumer, which used to be a lot more complicated than it is now, thanks to people like Amazon and Uber and Alibaba and others really disrupting that supply chain. So first thing is disintermediation, and the way it shows up is the growth of direct-to-consumer products. And so if you're thinking about doing a direct-to-consumer, and it may just be your farm shop, but I'm really thinking now about on a bigger scale and being able to do that online, that direct-to-consumer is my first big trend that I think you need to look at. The second one is subscription business models are here to stay. So I came out of software, and in the early 2000s, we changed from what was called an enterprise sale model where we sold, big multi-million-dollar deals. And instead we said, how about you basically pay us every month for perpetuity, but you pay us monthly instead of a massive upfront fee. And so these subscription models have made their way into every kind of equipment. So we're seeing it in farm equipment, we see it, ghost kitchens, I think is very interesting, which are kitchens that have been designed just for catering for people like Uber. So they used to be like, you used to have a whole kitchen, and a restaurant would send its stuff out on Uber Eats. And now what we're seeing is kitchens that are set up and can be rented on a monthly basis. A bit like just renting any other space, like co-working space. So we're seeing that model, subscription model, coming into everything. And what we're seeing is with direct to consumer, we're seeing more and more of these food boxes. So the Hello Freshes and the, Eat Well boxes. So they have been massively popular under COVID and under the pandemic, but actually their popularity has been growing for a long time. I know my own family have been ordering food boxes, particularly as we've got couples where both are trying to work from home and they're trying to homeschool as well. And so these subscription boxes where food just arrives and people know what to cook, and maybe they get it for 3 days a week or 5 days a week or all 7, those subscription boxes are not going away. They took a while to get popular and profitable, and they're absolutely cranking now. So Blue Apron, which is the world's biggest one of these, is out of the US, and it's had to turn off new sales because during the pandemic, its popularity grew so much it couldn't deliver. So first one is direct to consumer. Second one is the subscription business model isn't going away. So how can you sign up clients, sign them up for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, have them pay the same fee every month that hits their credit card, and you have certainty of sale to that customer. The next side that I think is not going away is that we see a big move from volume into value. So this is my third trend. It has also been coming for quite some time. And what we see here is that I'm an entrepreneur. I consider farmers to be business people. And so you have to make a choice. Would you like to sell more things with a smaller margin, or less things with a bigger margin? And I'm all for the bigger margin. And so what we saw during the pandemic was, particularly in the meat industry, we saw that claims-based meat had the highest price increases across the planet. So we saw in the US 34% increase in price during last year for GMO-free, antibiotic-free and organic meat. We're also starting to see that that's coming through into other claims. But this idea of how could you look at your business, look at your farm and think, what's the greatest value that I could provide to the consumer rather than the greatest volume of meat? And so here we might be thinking about specialty breeds. I talked before about Welsh lamb, so it may be spring coastal lamb, or it might be particular heritage breeds, or it might be the Charolais beef. Whatever it is, Wagyu, there's a variety of these that people are willing to pay more for, either because they love the taste or because there's some other attributes that they're keen on. So my third big trend is volume or value. The fourth one is a little more controversial, but if we follow on from claims-based, what we're seeing is real consumer demand for regenerative agriculture. And people like Whole Foods and others are starting to create their own certifications for what regenerative agriculture might mean. And I certainly know all over the world, farmers are having debates about the definitions of regenerative agriculture. It's not going away. It is the next food miles. It's an area that consumers are demanding, and they may not entirely understand it. But I think if you miss that, you will miss a major piece of value in the market. As well as that, as farmers, we're the most affected by climate change. And so anything that we can do that helps to look after the planet and reduces the impact of climate change, to me, has got to be good for farming. And my very last trend is pandemic related. We saw during the pandemic a huge rise in supermarket sales of meat. I believe as vaccinations start to take hold, people are going to be sick of eating at home, and we're going to see a flip back to an increase in sales to food service. So if you aren't aligned with some sort of food service provider, I'd be thinking about it now, because while supermarkets have been booming, I truly believe that post-pandemic and post-vaccination in the first world countries, we're going to see a real desire to just go out for dinner. And that going out for dinner is going to translate into more food being sold through food service. Thanks so much.
So let's just reintroduce the panel before they come on and we kick off with the Q&A. First of all, we've got Christine Takon, and Christine is a newly appointed chair at Red Tractor, as she just mentioned. She was the UK's first grocery code adjudicator. She has a wealth of experience in supply chains and worked with Co-op in their farming business, Mars Confectionery and Frontera. Her other roles include chair of MDS, a training provider for graduates to get them into the food industry and the produce sector. And she's also non-exec director as AF Group, a £250 million farmer controlled purchasing organisation. And last but by no means least, Christine, I don't know how you have time for all of this, you're also chair of the BBC Rural Advisory Committee. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
I get to introduce Stefan Vogel, probably as I'm the only one that's got a slight chance of pronouncing that right. Stefan is head of the agri-commodity market research at Rabobank. He's also global sector strategist for cereals and oilseed at Rabobank's food and agribusiness research team. His expertise centers around an in-depth agri-commodity market research, analytics, and strategic planning for the grain and oilseed sector. Welcome, Stefan.
And then last but by no means least, joining us live from New Zealand, it's Melissa Clark-Reynolds. Melissa is amazing. She juggles many roles, including director at Atkins Ranch in New Zealand, exporting lamb to the USA, and the first producer in the world to achieve non-GMO project verification. She's an advisory board at Iron Duke, which helps clients navigate public policy and related issues. And Melissa likes to think and speak about the future, as we're just hearing, with particular interest in new business models. And then finally, Melissa was the first independent director of Beef and Lamb New Zealand, so knows our sector really well. You're most welcome. I can't see Stefan or Melissa just yet, so if you're both able to press your share audio and video button in the top right hand corner, will bring you onto main stage. Otherwise, the pressure's on Christine to answer some grain questions, grain trading questions into China, which I know you're not going to particularly enjoy on a Tuesday night. So we'll try and get them on stage.
I know one of our first questions that we've got coming up is from a dairy farmer near me, Matt Ford. So I'm just wondering if we can get Matt onto the stage, Sarah in the background, to come and ask his questions, if that is lined up.
The good news, it had your name against it, Christine, as one of yours. Should we kick off with that question, Isaac? Do you want me to read that one out?
I think so. Let's go for it.
Let's go for that whilst we're waiting for Stefan and Melissa to join us on screen. Stefan, Melissa, if you could just press your share audio video button, we'll bring you onto main stage. So, Christine, this is actually a perfect one for you, and it's not trade grain related to China, you'll be pleased to hear. Matt Ford is a dairy farmer, and he was asking, UK farmers, we operate in a densely populated country with high regulatory standards and very wealthy population on our doorstep. We have idyllic countryside and a long history of traditional local foods. How can we capitalise on these opportunities and avoid having our products marketed as commodities, which are competing with lower standards and fewer marketable features? And it is always that commodity added value piece. And you talked about Porter's Five Forces amazingly there. What are your thoughts, and what can some of these agri-leaders watching tonight's session do?
I think what comes first to mind is to do something different. If you want to be don't want to be treated as a commodity, then how are you doing something different? It's a bit more difficult when you're a dairy farmer, but I remember meeting on a train Joe Towers, who was busy producing a particular type of milk. When, just like Fever Tree Tonic goes with a decent gin, he said he was trying to make the perfect milk to go with coffee, and actually made barista coffee. And pre-COVID, I mean, his father just had a milk delivery business. And pre-COVID, they were now producing more milk for baristas in London than they were for their local milk delivery. But interestingly, I didn't know what Melissa was going to say, but I actually was going to say, go to the top end of quality and market directly to the public if you can, which was 2 of her 4 points. I don't know whether there was a 5th or 6th one. I hope you get to hear that eventually. But so go top quality, market directly to the public if you can. And then I think probably is even another one of her points, or maybe it's not even a separate one, but is work out how you can add value to what you do. Try and add value. So that is part of the first 2 points about differentiate and go quality. But think how you can add value. So you don't even have to go higher quality. You could just put it in a box of other food. You could package it differently. You could do something to add quality that way. But I think it's about differentiation, and don't think you can produce the same thing as everybody else and miraculously get a better price than them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christine. Melissa, you had us hanging on those bullet points, so apologies we didn't get the end of your video. Disintermediation, subscription models, volume, value, and regen, we were towards the end of that. Would you mind just finishing that off for us? Because I was actually hanging on every word.
I know, and I feel terrible because, of course, in preparation for this, I watched other people's videos and not my own. So I'm busy thinking, oh my God, what did I actually say was the fifth? But if I didn't say this, I should have, which is really around climate change. And if I didn't say that, I suspect that I talked about buy local. But now I feel terrible that I didn't rewatch my own video. But coming back, I couldn't agree with Christine more. And I think about this whole idea of, do you want to work harder or do you want to work not quite so hard? So what I mean by that is that, I've seen a lot of organizations say where dairy farmers moving to once a day milking have got significantly, and I know trials in New Zealand, they were getting in excess of 75% of their yield with single day milking, but they'd actually halved their costs. So the revenue to the farmer might have dropped, but their profitability went up. And I, as an entrepreneur, I'm always interested in profitability, and I don't just mean as a percentage, but actually, total numbers. So I think sometimes we think maybe some of these new ways of farming or higher value systems might cost us more, but actually the yield is higher. And that's why I wanted to point out that last year in the US, companies with claims-based meat got a 34% price uplift over those who were not doing claims-based. And I think the evidence is now there very strongly that the premium products can make you a lot more money without working necessarily that much harder.
That's a great point. Stefan, you're dealing in commodity markets a lot. Are you seeing producers doing more on added value, and where's the success that they're doing that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we see that especially in times when the commodity prices are low, that there is a drive on the producer side to look for something that is paying higher bills. But with that often comes higher workload and higher costs. So good examples, for example, in the US are a drive in those 4 years, 5 years they had with poor income on farm levels on the grain side to just look into organic. But it's a niche market. So if you have too many people switching in that direction, you immediately are at the point where you're killing the margin. So, and even organic in grains and oilseeds can be a commodity market, given that you have global flows of those goods. We also see that in certain regions now, farmers are looking to diversify their commodities on the ground. For example, you see in Australia these days that barley can't go easily to China anymore because of duties. I was just talking to farmers in Australia this morning who said, well, look, we're moving into the areas where we can with mung beans and all kind of other goods, and we're taking barley completely out of the rotation. So a completely different crop, has some soil benefits, but on the other side, it's a market-driven decision, and one where, yes, it's still a kind of a commodity market, but a much more specialized one compared to grains and oilseeds in general, if you're dealing wheat or barley. Yeah.
That's brilliant, thank you. And in your presentation there, Stefan, you talked about China and ASF and on the pork side and the impacts that that's had. More generally, what are you seeing coming out of China in terms of key drivers and indicators that we should be thinking on the UK market and be aware of in terms of ag and hort strategic planning? And which are the key indicators on markets should we be watching? That, we're all so busy. What are the things that we should be checking on every day?
Yeah. Well, I always look at the demand flows into China, and it's not about what is the last ship that sailed, but in terms of what have they already bought for the next 6 months. So you were tracking that as analysts fairly closely to get an idea of what's still out there, what do they still need. But I also look and talk a lot to my colleagues in terms of who cover the livestock market there, because for me, the best indicator what's happening to grain market is if we have a decent idea of what's happening to the livestock sector in the country. And if we look at the rebuilding of the sow herd, we already have an indicator of what's going to happen maybe to piglet in the future. So we're tracking a lot of these things. But for the farmer in the UK, I think that the clear sign in our talks also to our farmers and we as Rabobank finance farmers in the US and in Brazil and in Australia is this is really a good time. It has been a perfect storm around the world that drove these prices up to a very high level, very, very unexpected by many and very quickly. This thing can turn sour maybe in 6 months, in a year, maybe in 3 years, but we are convinced that farmers will increase production, and with that, supply will easily catch up over the next few years with the demand side. So those prices will go away, and I think it's the perfect time for some of the farmers to not only plan 1 year or ahead, but plan 12 to 36 months ahead and see what they can log in here and there, some of the margins, to have a certain cash flow coming into their farms, and also to plan for the investment side that needs to be happening. We still feel that, especially if you're in a commodity market, you need to be a cost leader. This is a market where the Brazilians have an advantage in many commodities because the currency is so weak. Domestic prices are good. They will have a much longer breath on farm than many of the US farmers or the UK farmers.
Yes.
I comment on that briefly.
I was going to come to you, Melissa, because can I
Yeah.
just preempt this, that your reading list is massive. You read so much stuff, and working in the meat industry, that's one of their areas in your portfolio. You don't just read the meat news. Would you mind just sharing, what you read, the indicators you watch, and then obviously you ride off the back of what Stefan was saying, because I'm fascinated with your insight.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's two big things that I'm seeing. And so one of them, I think, it's an interesting counterpoint to the higher value one. So my first job was on a sausage line, so I've worked in the meat industry for a long time, and I see that we have these pendulum swings where countries want us to perhaps export whole carcasses, and then they get to a point where we do all the processing onshore, say in the UK, and then we move it to China, and they want shoulders or flaps or whatever it is, and then there's a pendulum swing back to whole carcasses. And at the moment, I'm seeing a lot of demand coming out of China for whole carcasses. Now, the problem with that for UK farmers is that means that it's very hard for us to do the value add that comes from cuts. And it also means that while we might utilize the whole carcass, they're buying it at a much cheaper price than if we utilize the entire carcass. So I'm seeing downward pressure from China come in terms of wanting a whole carcass, which they will then process onshore. So that's sort of one area. The other area that I'm starting to see is that globally, over the last year, we've seen a big increase in demand for both dairy products and meat, and actually fruit I've seen as well, through the supermarket channel. And this might be home delivery from a supermarket, or it might be people going into a supermarket and buying it. I'm predicting that after last year's roughly 20% growth for the meat industry through the supermarket channel, we could be seeing up to a 30% reduction in this coming year. And I think that's important. This is on volume, not necessarily on price. And the reason for that is that as vaccinations are happening globally, people are desperate to get out of the house. And the first thing they're going to do is go sit in a cafe and have a lamb salad instead of making it at home, or they're going to go out for a rack, or they're going to go out for roast beef or pork or whatever it is. And they're just going to be so excited to go to the pub for roast of the day. They're not going to be buying that from a supermarket. And so I think we have to be looking carefully at what the mix is. So I'm not saying there'll be less demand for meat. I want you to hear that, but the channels will be changing in this year as people move from that boom in the supermarket sales to back to food service. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the big prediction that I'm making. If I'm totally wrong, fire me. But that's what I'm believing is going to happen later this year.
I don't think you are. I think that channel mix is one to watch. Before we let you off the hook, though, give it a little insight to your reading list, Melissa. What should these agri leaders be reading?
Well, I think there's some interesting stuff. I mean, I read Meeting Place every day, which with an A, which is a meat news. I read a lot on agri investments. I read Civil Eats, which I really love. I read The Eater, but I read other things as well. I read. There are lots of cool things you can subscribe to if you put a Google alert. So I'm an epidemiologist amongst other things, so I have alerts for novel zoonoses. I'm really interested in what the next pandemic is, because there will be another one in a year or two at the rate that we're going. I don't know, I've got so much on my reading list. I love Metro Obscura. I don't know if anyone follows that. This morning in New Zealand, I posted a little value add out of the Apple industry where they're putting stickers on apples, and then the sun affects the color of the apple, and you can stencil company logos onto the apples. I remember being a teenager and putting a heart sticker on my shoulder and trying to get a tan tattoo. So it's that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I hope that's a good starter list.
I love it. Izak, I'll hand over to you for a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've got a few people in the queues and wanting to come on stage to ask the question. So fingers crossed, technology works for us. The first one is Ian Smith. So Ian, if you want to come on stage, please, I think somebody will allow you on stage and to come and ask your question, please. Just give us a brief introduction of yourself, who you are and where you're from, what sector you're in, and then we'll hear your question, please. That's not going to work for us.
Technology,
right?
So it's not.
Technology is not going to work. He's actually sent the question in, so unless he comes in any point now, his question was: do we have post-degree professional development that is understood by the industry and attract the graduates? So new entrants, how do we get people enthused by the industry we're in, and how do we attract those leading, young people into the industry?
I'll go first.
Who shall we?
I'll go first.
Go for it, Christine.
Because I think this very much plays to a story I want to tell about MDS, which is the graduate training scheme I chair. And we recruit people from any disciplines from university to do a 2-year program where they do 4 6-month assignments with our members. And it's absolutely booming at the moment. The interest from undergraduates in the food industry is unprecedented. It is massive. When I joined the business, we had 32 trainees. We've now got 73. We had 30 members at the time. We've now got 60. We've got the people that we're bringing in might have any sort of degree from bioarchaeology, which I didn't even know existed, languages, geography, things like that. But they are all seeing the food industry as a sector that is secure. We are still recruiting. Lots of areas are doing particularly well. You can understand if you're in hospitality or aerospace and things like that, they're probably not seen as attractive sectors for these undergraduates at the moment. The caliber that are coming forward that want to work in our industry are enormous. And we are, by comparison, only tiny. We're a drop in the ocean of what's needed. But we're finding that people from all these different backgrounds, very bright, very capable people. It's like with MDS, it's almost like every year the caliber of people we're recruiting is getting higher. So not having any issues in trying to get them in, but they don't know the food industry, and that's why they're attracted to us, because we will show them 4 different businesses and 4 completely different roles, and by the end of it they have an idea that they never ever want to be a technical manager again, but I quite like the idea of being in commercial, or I quite like the idea of running, being in production or managing a fruit farm. So they're getting fantastic exposure. So I think it's a matter of communication and getting these people giving them a way of understanding what our industry can be, and then being prepared to train them. But certainly, it's absolutely booming at the moment. And on top of that, I think there's fantastic training in our industry. I think some of the leadership training is phenomenal.
Melissa, can we ask you on that? Some new people into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know much about the higher education space in this space, and New Zealand, what are we? We're the size of Manchester or something, so we don't have a massive amount of training, and I think our largest agricultural university has about 1,000 students at it, so it's a different thing. But I think that more challenging, which I believe is happening in the UK as well as the rest of the world, is really how we get farm workers, and that's you may know that New Zealand's borders have been closed now for over a year, and our dairy industry is highly dependent on Filipino workers and workers who have come in from India and Sri Lanka particularly. Our horticulture sector is highly dependent on people who come in from Pacific Islands on regional kind of temporary work schemes where they come in for the picking season. We're at apple picking season at the moment, and I'm in the Hawke's Bay, and a lot of the apples are going to lie on the ground this year. So I think there's some broader systemic issues that we have to think about working conditions, about career planning, and it's not really my area of expertise, but I see it causing us more disruption than we probably imagined, particularly with closed borders.
Excellent. Just a reminder for everybody, if you want to come on stage to ask your question, there should be a blue bar in your top right-hand sayings, and please share audio and video. So please come on stage and come and ask your question. We want to keep it live, interactive. Technologies, as always, is a bit of a challenge, but we'll keep on trying. So please do try that. I've got a pre-submitted questions, and when people registered, you could submit that. One from Martin Hodinot, dairy farmer, saying, is future land management likely to focus more on intensifying or extensifying production? I guess I'd caught to me between what the consumer want or they think they want, and feeding a ever-increasing population.
All right, I'm going to answer that then. I think it's and.
Excellent.
I think that you're going to see both. I don't think it's one or the other. I think that we're going to see some areas where we see an increase in intensive farming. We may see some areas where we see an increase in use of supplementary feeds, whether it's palm kernel expiller or soy or grain. And then we're going to see another piece of the market that is all about grass-fed, maybe finished on chicory, very low numbers of animals per hectare. So I believe in both. Actually, in all of them, we're going to see an and. I don't believe it's one or the other.
I mean, I would have said there'll be an intensification on the best land, intensification close to where the consumers are, and extensification, planting trees, rewilding a long way away from people and on the poorer land. So it's both, but it's probably being much more selective.
I think from my angle, we're basically looking at the policy side too. So the UK clearly has left the European Union, but in the EU, we have the Green Deal. And on that side of the ocean, we are striving for 25% organic farmed acreage. Right now, we're not even at 10%. So that will be a massive increase. And with that, the farming will change towards what our politicians think will be a more environmental kind of way of farming. I'm not saying that this is true or not, but this is the idea behind the Green Deal in my mind. So if I look at that, I think we will see less crops in the future because organic has lower yield, and we will have a different crop rotation over here. So we will have a more diversified rotation. And with that, we will have a change also in farming. The other thing where we see quite a bit happening around the world over the next 5 or 10 years, in our view, is in terms of carbon on farm. So how do farmers benefit from the decarbonization of the world right now? We have every country in the world who have some ideas about how can we reduce carbon, or at least committed to targets, and probably don't have an idea how to do it. The food and agri side, in our view, will play a massive role. And right now the supermarkets are looking at the food producers, and the food producers are looking at the grain traders, and the grain traders are looking at the farmer, and the farmer doesn't know where to look anymore because he's the last one in the chain. So everybody expects the farmer to do something. So we think that in carbon farming, there is hopefully a second or third income stream for farmers down the road, that there is a market for, if you're showing that you're storing carbon in your soils, that could generate certificates, and hopefully those certificates will be worth money because somebody in the world needs those to reduce their carbon footprint. It's not a perfect system yet. We're in the very early stages of that, but we feel that this will be a driver over the next 5 or 10 years that can generate income streams for farmers around the world.
Excellent. We've got our first volunteer onto the stage. Technology finally works, and it's been a challenge. Martin, please ask your question to the panel.
Yeah, hi. I've always wanted to do this. I've chaired so many meetings, but never had a chance to come up on the stage. And hello, Laura. Good to see you again. This question is for Christine and Stefan, and possibly they'll give us two different answers. Christine said at the beginning of her presentation that you need to get to know your customer. And I work in the cereals and oilseeds industry in the UK, and we have some pretty fragmented supply chains. Worse still, in some ways, not only are they fragmented, but parts of them are quite adversarial and certainly not integrated. Now, we keep being told that the power in the supply chains doesn't appear to be with the farmer, it appears to be higher up the supply chain. And we're also told that information and data is power. From the point of view of the grower, what power will give them greater strength? What information will give them more power?
So, Christine, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. Because what I was thinking about, I mean, if you don't mind, I'll talk about something where I feel like I know a bit more, which is more to do in the grocery supply chain, which is where understanding the relation, when you're looking at, when retailers are talking to their suppliers, they're very often not not necessarily trying to understand their supplier's business, and nor is the supplier trying to understand the retailer, to look at where are the inefficiencies in the way that we're doing things wrong. So it was more a sort of an open dialogue to try and cut out inefficiency, which is one of the key areas that I was trying to get retailers to focus on when I was the groceries code adjudicator. I don't know your sector well enough to say a lot, but I was asked to speak at one of the NFU crops boards when they were asking me, how do we manage to get the end users in our sectors to at least have calibrated equipment so that they can't arbitrarily reject things because it happens to be a good or a bad season, you know, whichever way works in their favor. And they were actually saying, well, we know that we're right because we're audited by Red Tractor, but the people that we're selling to are not calibrating equipment. It's conveniently giving them answers that happen to work with their market. So whether there is some knowledge and data in that in trying to sort it out, I don't know, Martin, but that was certainly, I would start with actually at least trying to make sure that everybody's equipment is saying the same thing and giving the same results. And if necessary, reporting and blacklisting the end users whose equipment doesn't seem to be quite up to standard.
Stefan, I'm going to put that to you. Any good examples from elsewhere in the world, please?
Yeah, I mean, if I look, I think in the commodity chain, a lot of the farmers these days know as much as the global grain traders. So a lot of our companies that I'm working closely with are the big grain houses. I don't think they have a big information advantage anymore. You can learn everything and you can know everything for free about prices in the UK, in the US, wherever you want to. So with that, I think it's not so much about understanding that, but I think it's still what has been for many years the case, that farmers often love to work on the field, sit on the tractor, work on the yield, increase the yield, but marketing is an important part of that. And that's not only building a storage and putting the grain in there and waiting for a little bit and selling it, but I think farmers have become much smarter around the world in terms of when to market and how to market their grains. I know that it's not perfectly easy for all farmers to also do some forward sales, but I see also in many regions of the world, at least where we finance bank farms in Australia, be it in the US, where farmers also do quite some forward sales and not only store everything and then wait after the harvest to sell, but participate especially in those high price times and always looking at the farm margins. I'm pretty often wrong in my price forecast. Everybody is, so you will never sell all the time at the highest levels and buy at the lowest, but it's down to making money on farm by doing smart marketing and having a good cash flow.
Excellent, thank you very much. Next question that's come in is, what are the key lessons global ag has learned from this global pandemic? Melissa, so you are in a fairly protected area there is and of the world, and what is the take from that end of the world, please?
I'm going to answer this one a slightly different way, which is almost like, what didn't we learn? So I studied environmental epidemiology in 1989. Okay, so you're going to ages me, and in my class, we were doing some work back in the late 80s where we were modeling what the impact of deforestation and extending agriculture into new habitats was going to do on pandemics. So I want you to understand this work's been around for, 30 odd years. And two things really struck me. And then I did some later work on this in the early 90s. So one is that as we heat the planet and we change the climate, so some areas, obviously, they're seeing cooling or more precipitation, we're changing the habitats for insects that bear diseases that affect us. So we were predicting back in the late 80s that around now we would start to see an explosion of insect-borne diseases into areas that traditionally haven't had them. So we're talking here about things like dengue fever and malaria. So that's one. And I think agriculture globally has not been thinking about what the impacts of it might be as we move into new habitats. So I'm not talking about British farmers here. I'm thinking about Brazil, China, Indonesia. And the other thing that we predicted is that as animal agriculture expanded, we would be bringing pandemic.
That wasn't just...
What was that?
So we just lost you for a second there. So I was just about to panic, but you're back on. Carry on, Melissa.
So, we're bringing mammals into contact that have never been in contact before. So if we think about this one, where there's no natural habitat, a pangolin and a human coexist. And so we in the agriculture sector have put these animals together, and we would expect to see that as we do that, as we bring mammals into contact with mammals that don't naturally live in the same habitats, we're going to see more diseases jump the species barrier. And that's part of why I look for novel zoonoses kind of each morning when I get up. And so I just think one of the things that we probably have to take from this pandemic is we see these species jumping pandemics happen roughly every 3.5 years. This one was right on time. And we will be expecting another one roughly 2 to 3.5 more years' time. Now, we're definitely hoping it won't be anything like this one. But if you look back at the Ebolas, the SARS, and so on, they follow the same pattern. So I think one of the big ones that we need to learn from this pandemic is that elimination was possible in many economies. And the economies that chose not to go down an elimination path found themselves in far more difficult financial situations than the countries that went down elimination. I know that may not be very popular politically, but countries like Taiwan, New Zealand, Vietnam, our economies bounced back incredibly quickly after what were very harsh short-term lockdowns, way harsher than any other countries. The OECD put the New Zealand lockdown at 97 out of 100. So I think that there's just a couple of lessons we need to learn there. There's another pandemic coming. Hopefully it's not as bad as this one. We have to be thinking as a global agriculture sector what we might be able to do to prevent them and to manage them. And then the next one is that if you're worried about your business bouncing back, which I am for farmers, harsher lockdowns may be what we need to be looking at the next pandemic in order to be able to reopen markets faster. And that may be counterintuitive because I know in the countries that have suffered the most, they had a debate around the economy versus the virus. But actually the countries that just went, you know what, we've got to eliminate the virus, their economies bounce back faster.
Christine or Stefan, a quick comment from you about what we've learned.
Sure, let me jump in then. I think we learned working from home works, which also for farmers may actually mean something. I mean, I know many of my friends in Germany who have a small farm somewhere and either have to give them up and get an office job somewhere further away or not. But now I think even for farmers, there is a way to say I can find a decent online job somewhere in the world as part-time addition to my farm income. So I think that's a good chance for young people who had to decide before, do I leave the rural areas and go to a big city or not? So that's probably good news. The other thing I think that is good news is that the supply chains have incredibly well worked through these very unprecedented times. I mean, nobody knew if the flows of goods would happen, how commodities cross the borders. Yes, we had some hiccups here and there, but overall, all of us had food when we needed it. We may didn't have toilet paper here in Germany, but that's more the problem of stupidity of people, not of the problem of the chain. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of these chains work very well. And I think also the attention to the chain has increased. And with that, I think sustainability is an issue that will stay with us beyond this crisis. It has been a topic before the crisis evolved. I think sustainability will be on the agenda, not only of consumers, but also of politicians going forward.
I've got a few different points just to add, one of which is that plastic on our fruit and veg went the wrong way. And it's going to take a long while to get back to where we did get to, and confidence in picking up things that other people might have touched. But that's the negative. I think that retailers recognised how much they desperately needed more local sourcing. And I expect they will all have policies in future about what percentage they want to get locally if they possibly can. I think the other thing is that consumers bought different things. And, you know, the opportunity to have actually been able to sell huge bags of flour to people would have been very exciting. So if Melissa's right, we're going to get these every 2 years, then maybe start having business models planning for the next one. But that was interesting. And the other thing was just retailers recognised that when they simplified the range, how much more manufacturers could produce. And I think that, you know, I think one I heard was they reduced the number of SKUs of bread by 70% and got a 30% increase in total volume on the shelves. Just because all of the faffing around and making all of these different lines to try and get a little bit more money with, you know, organic bread with sesame seeds on top and another one with pumpkin seeds on top. And you say, right, we're just going to have one type of organic bread. And the volumes went through the roof and we were able to feed people. And I think that I was very pleased by how well the retailers on the whole worked with their suppliers and recognised that we could work together and we could solve issues. And I think that when all the teams that have so often been adversarial are actually working against something else, you know, miracles can happen. And I think that certainly the retail trade in the UK did absolutely brilliantly, as did all of their suppliers. I think there's huge credit.
Isaac, are you handing over the baton?
That's over to you. I think we've got a question in from Andy Rummings. So Andy's struggling with his camera, so you can ask it on his behalf, please.
I will do. Just before I do, I was just intrigued when we were talking about COVID there, because I know we're not going to labour the COVID point, so we'll move off it in a second. One thing that none of you have chatted about is our reconnection with cooking. Maybe because I've been the first lockdown making a lot of banana bread. Do you think, I've given up on that now, do you think that's going to change people's, I guess, connection with food? Because we're seeing more and more data coming out of the US, interestingly, this week, that meal repertoire of 6 meals isn't the case anymore. We're expanding that to 12 to 15, allowing other categories to get in there. Is that a good thing? Melissa, if I could ask you on that, are you seeing that globally?
I read an article, and I don't know who to attribute this to, so it's not mine, but that under lockdown, people became either hunks, chunks, or drunks. And
I was maybe all both. Well, I wasn't I wasn't a hunk. Like, you can roll that one out.
But you know, my son took up, like, he lives down near Hastings, and he took up running. He looks amazing, and I've been home cooking, right? You know, so his whole family, I can see that they've just transformed their health in this last year. Whereas my daughter came home from university. She's a fabulous baker. We ate so much baked goods. Like, I just got to a point where we definitely became chunks. But I think there's some interesting things here, which is that what we might call home cooking in the UK and what some of our markets might call home cooking is not the same thing. And this is why I'm interested in the rise of the food box. You know, I've been watching them for quite some time, and they took a long time to become profitable and popular. But if I look at some of our markets, what they think of as home cooking is almost more what I would call like home assembly. Do you know? So it is that one step back from cooking from scratch, which I might do. And I do think it's great that people are cooking at home. But I wonder how much they will continue that if they have an opportunity not to. Yeah. So I'm sure that some of it will stick, but I don't believe it's going to be at the rates that it is, which is why I'm very interested to see what happens to supermarket sales in the next year.
Awesome, thank you. Christine, Stefan, any baking tips? Have you been doing a lot of banana bread, or have you eased off that now?
I found a fabulous recipe book, which basically was one tin cooking, quick roasting tin, and everything in the whole book cooks within 30 minutes. So I can stop work at 6 and we could all be sitting down to eat at 7. But I don't think it will be long before everybody goes back to the way they used to be. And if necessary, if anything, we'll actually eat out even more because let's do it because we can.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'll move us back to, sorry, as Isaac says, I'm going off piece there, which is naughty of me. Andy Rummings, and I know that this has come through the chat, which is great, and there's a bit of conversation around this, around Regen Ag, and love that it's open to all farmers, and you and your peers define what it is. It's flexible and evolving and open source. Do you think the term will get defined and owned by certification bodies, and that will, and I'll have to pay to use it? And I guess my add-on to that is I'm seeing Regen Ag being used interchangeably with the word sustainability. So how do we departmentalise the two? Christine, could I come to you first? And because I feel like I'm picking on Melissa a bit. Have you got a thought on Regen Ag? And then I'll come to Melissa for her thoughts.
I'm not quite sure whether there's a sort of a mini dig there at whether Red Tractor might come and certify it, but I think on the whole, if it does get asked to certify it, it'll be because end users need to have some way of making sure that somebody says something is regen, that it is, and to a degree that is actually protecting the people that are doing it from food fraud. And by the way, I think food fraud is not something we're talking about, but apparently it is absolutely massive. And particularly in food service. And very often you might think you're getting hate, but you probably aren't. If you actually enjoy it, I do sometimes wonder, does it really matter? But certainly when it came to horse meat, it did. I don't know if that's enough of an answer to get it going. I do think that somebody's got to say this is correct, whether it's Red Tractor or whether it's the Soil Association or whether it's somebody else. It's about, if you want people to pay a premium for it, it's how do you make sure that it's genuine and not fraudulent.
Yeah, trust in the chain. Melissa, what are you seeing in Regen?
I guess 2019 at the end of the year, Whole Foods puts out its predictions for the next year. And so for 2020 pre-pandemic, its #1 prediction and food trend was Regen Ag. I find it interesting that during the pandemic, they put out their 2021 list and it didn't make the top 10. So I found that fascinating. It went from #1 a year ago to not on the list. However, I am seeing people like Timberland and UGG and others start to require regen of some sort in order to be suppliers. And I track the growth of Regen Ag on food branding. And so what I'm seeing is that I'm seeing a lot of brands actually go out saying that they either hire from Regen, that they source from Regen farmers, or that they're producing regenerative food, and it might be rice or pasta, or skins or wool. So I'm seeing a rise of that, and I'm seeing that I think people like Whole Foods in particular, I'd name them, that I'll be surprised if in the next year they don't come out with their own standard.
Yeah, great.
And I guess I watch people like the Soil Association, but I also watch Savory Institute out of the US, and I think they're doing some really leading work in this area. So I think if you are looking at how you might get a premium for your products from Regen, I'd be starting to align myself with someone like a Whole Foods or with a Savory at the moment, because I think they're the ones getting the closest to an agreement on what this might actually be. And I know there's so much international debate, but I think that it will be created by the market,
yes,
not by a certifying agency.
Stefan, what are you seeing in this space? And are you seeing the term being used interchangeably with sustainability? I know they're different things, but they seem to get muddled up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think in the commodity chain, it's more talking about sustainability. And I saw in the chat earlier some questions about the Brazilian and the sustainability there in terms of decarbonization and also deforestation. So clearly those are all key factors. But if you look at the global market, I think we also need to acknowledge that we in Europe are well advanced in our demands. And if you look at a global market that serves quite a high volume towards Asia, the demands are different for those commodities. So we can get all the certification from wherever we want to. If we say, oh, we want to have sustainable soy, we can buy it in the US, we can find the volumes in Brazil. So it needs to step one level up. But clearly, I think in other regions, we also see the chances that we have some money paid and premiums paid for regenerative agriculture, even in parts of the US. That is a discussion point.
Yeah. Great point. And I was really interested to see some of the folks that signed up to this evening. One of the names was Regenerator. So I thought, it's in our psyche for farmers of our roles in terms of job title. I really love that. One of the questions that's come through the chat, and we've touched on it a little bit, but it would be great to unpack it a bit more. What impact does the panel think carbon offsetting using land, either ag or forestry, will have on land availability to all sectors? We feel that if true carbon taxing is put in place, profitable carbon intensive businesses will look to land to offset through sequestration. It would be great to get the panel's thoughts on this, as we're already seeing it in the UK land market. That's from Charlie, dairy, beef and sheep farmer. Christine, have you got any thoughts on that?
I'm just as amused by what's going on in the chat that I'm busy writing down green tractor and about to patent that.
Oh, I can't see that chat, you see. It's great.
Oh, chat's fantastic.
Oh,
that is great.
I need to jump.
I think Andy was saying he's not having a go
We're
at
multitasking.
No. I was amused. But yes, I think you were just asking something about carbon emitting business. Let me just tell you that every single carbon emitting business in the world will be trying to reduce the amount of carbon it emits. The banks are trying to, Stefan, to take over from this. The banks are looking at who they're investing in, and they are aiming to reduce their portfolio. And some of the UK banks have even said, we either have to work with farmers to reduce their carbon emissions, or we have to stop lending money to farmers, because it is, we cannot defend the situation to our shareholders. So I don't think there will be any business. I mean, just the news in the last week, somebody had a carbon neutral aviation fuel, didn't they? I can't remember what it was actually making out, or it was starch or something, but every single carbon emitting business will be trying to reduce its carbon. I do think that, as I said earlier, I think poor land will come out of production where it gets used for increased sequestration. I think we need to have a proper carbon calculating and trading platform. My understanding is that the global carbon platforms doesn't actually take into account any hedges and trees. It's just about sequestration in soil. We've got to have something that is sensible and really looks at carbon. And something in the chat, people were saying, if I have already sequestered a whole load of carbon, I need to be rewarded for that, not just rewarded for any incremental carbon that is sequestered. And I expect it's going to need proper taxation of all carbon intensive inputs, whether that be fuel, fertilizer, or whatever else. So, but I really do not think that any carbon intensive business is just going to buy its way out of it, because people won't invest in it.
Yes. Thank you. Stefan, Rabobank's position, you must be looking at this day in, day out.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, we have quite a bit of sustainable financing, what we call it. So we go with especially our wholesale clients and we discuss with them sustainability targets they want to meet. And that doesn't always need to be carbon. It can also be in terms of what kind of energy they are using. It can be in terms of improving some of their waste management and so on. But we set quite a bit of very detailed targets with them. And we pay out of our pocket the differences in interest. So basically we say, if you don't meet your sustainability targets you have with us, you pay a high interest rate. If you meet a few of them, you basically pay the market rate. But if you are better than where we think you or where we hope you will be, we actually pay it out of our pocket. So we try to help clients, and a lot of people, maybe also in my company, are shaking a little bit their head saying, well, why are we paying for that? Isn't that the politician's job? But we feel that if our clients are business and their businesses are sustainable, that they have a more, and so we're investing in that. On the carbon side, I think we're, as said, I think still in the early stages, and we see it here in the chat. We heard it from Christine. There are a lot of questions how things will work. I fear a little bit that we see a few things happening here very quickly that we afterwards will feel like, oh, that was a disappointment. So I think it's going to take a few more years to actually have a proper system in place. There will be a lot of certification on farm happening because it needs to be trustworthy and clear that there isn't any fraud involved. But we still think that this is a model that can work and happen in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stefan. Melissa, anything else on carbon?
No. I think that's about it. I think, one of the difficulties we're seeing, perhaps coming back to regen briefly, is, we know that, say, deep perennial grasses sequester carbon, but what we also see is that with the volatility in climate, we're going to see years where, say, perhaps we have a damp spring and farms sequester quite a lot of carbon, and then we're going to have years where we have drought, and that soil is the carbon is re-released from the soil. And I'm really just trying to read the science as much as I can at the moment to try and understand how we both help farmers to sequester the best amount of soil they can, carbon they can in soil, and at the same time find ways to reward farmers who are sequestering, but not really penalise them in the years where there are droughts, say, where we're already having a terrible time on farm because of the drought. So I just think there's still a bit of complexity in the science to work through in this area.
Thank you. I can't believe we're coming to the end of the time. It's probably because I've been talking too much and I could talk to you for another hour, but you'll be relieved to know that I'm not going to. Just as a final wrap up, if for our audience, what one thing should they be taking away? Be that what they should be watching, reading, or a message from yourself to go and start doing like tomorrow. What would your advice be? Stefan, I'm going to pick on you first, if that's okay. What should our agri leaders be doing like tomorrow?
Well, I think that the good news is we still have to feed 9 billion people, and I think that our task of the farms to supply that food, whatever comes on top, be it everything else, I think that is a built on and hopefully a business model for the future. But I think there are a lot of consumers out there that will grow. The growth of population will happen in poor countries of the world, so there will be a large chunk of very price sensitive consumers in this world. And with every export that you have of a commodity out of the UK, that will have to price into a price-sensitive market. In the UK, as we discussed already quite a bit, I think the demands will be very different. So I think for parts of the commodities, it's not going to be a commodity, it's going to be a tailored product where you can have a premium. But in the long run, I think that the needs for feeding the world around the world sustainably is still there. And with that, we need to also have intense farming and high yields in many regions of the world, because otherwise we're not making 9 billion people a full stomach.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent.
Christine, what would your final thoughts be?
First of all, to congratulate people that are actually here, because I think the most important thing to do is what I would say is continual professional development. Keep being inquisitive, keep striving for efficiency, because that's always going to be the right thing to do. Yes, of course, you can go niche, you can do various other things, but keep driving efficiency and keep educating yourself. We're not good at that as an industry, but you're here and you're listening, and that's a big step forward. I'm sure we're not going to read as many things as Melissa does, but at least let her do the reading and then listen to what she's got to say.
I just follow her on Twitter, and that saves me all the reading. So that's my cheat tip. Melissa, what's your final thought?
I just want to say, I'm sorry that you can't see the chat, Laura, because the chat has been brilliant.
Oh, is it good?
It's brilliant. So you should go back and read it later. It's really brilliant. So I've had a couple of new Twitter followers in the last hour. So Melissa means honeybee. So my Twitter handle is honeybee geek. do follow me. I've got probably about, I don't know, 3,500, 4,000 farmers who follow me, and I do tweet on other things, but I do think about that a lot. Look, I'm just going to say be curious. And so I support what Laura said. You know, those of you who are on this call, you're already like the 1% more likely to succeed farmers, because you're the ones who are acting with curiosity. And I've just loved the chat because I love the inquiring minds that you have. And I think that's the key to our success. So I'm going to finish with this Einstein quote, which is that I have no special qualities. I am just deeply curious. And I think if we can come to our businesses with a sense of curiosity, as opposed to perhaps fighting for the way things already are, then we've already better than 99% of our competitors out there, or 99% of the other countries we might need to beat. So yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been fascinating.
Thank you so much for an absolute masterclass, the three of you. And if there's any questions that have come through the chat or we've had on email that we haven't had a chance to get to tonight, we'll come back to you afterwards with the answers to those questions. Izak, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to hand back to you if that's okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Laura, for helping me tonight to facilitate this. Thank you very much to Mark, Sarah, and Sammy in the background that's been frantically beavering away with the technical problems that we've had. So thank you to those guys. I guess so. Just to wrap up from me, as always, we would really love you to give us some feedback. So Sammy will put that in the chats and a link to our feedback form. If you've got 5 minutes now, please do it now. And if you're one of those people, get it done, get it over with. Otherwise, look out. And as Laura said, we'll send you an email with the recording of the session tonight. We'll just have to edit, top and tail it. Any questions that will come through on the chat and the pre-registered ones that we didn't get around to, we'll ask these three guys to just give us a quick idea of that. So we'll also put in the feedback form there. So please give us your feedback. That's how we keep on improving. As I mentioned, keep an eye on our live TED-type talks with inspirational leaders, and our news bundle will be launching in a month or two's time. So keep an eye out for that third Thursday of the month. Yes, and this is really how you can help drive your business forward. And also have a look at our closed Facebook group where we share hints, tips, leadership strategy, anything you ask us really to look into. So please do have a look at that. Which leave me just to say a final massive thank you to all three of our panelists, Stefan, Melissa, Christine. Thank you very much for your time this evening. But especially for you, the audience, keeping the chat alive, sending us our questions, keeping Laura and myself on our toes, and keeping the session, so it wasn't just the technology that challenged us, but you really challenged us, and that's what we're here for. So thank you very much. Have a good evening and good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Good night.